I remember the day like it was yesterday. I would wake up and the chaos would begin. The day started getting kids off to school, so getting kids dressed and fed and to school on time. The difference in today was that I wouldn't be going for the usual walk with my girlfriends, or I wouldn't be going to the office. I was heading to a lab to have blood taken to be tested for the BRCA gene mutation. The previous year, my father had been given an opportunity to be screened for the gene to see if he was a carrier. And what being a carrier meant was that if he had daughters, the risk factors for hereditary breast and ovarian cancer was greatly increased. So it had taken me months to get the courage to decide that this Monday I was going to the lab to get that blood work done. To once and for all find out if all the stress and all the worry was for nothing. I would drive to the lab, and I remember myself sitting in the car, and it would take my younger sister talking me almost through the front door. I would enter the lab, and it was, of course, like labs are on most days, crazy busy. And what I didn't realize was there was certain protocol that would have to be taken in order for them to handle the blood drawn well. They had to send paperwork to BC Cancer. There was so much clearance involved. The blood would end up being taken from that lab, and it would go to the US. And there was one lab at that time that owned the rights to this test. I remember sitting there and having my blood taken and feeling a visceral feeling that my life was about to change. I was told that I would hear in roughly 6 to 8 weeks what the result of that test would be. The call would come 7 weeks later. I remember the nurse calling and saying, "I'd like to book an appointment with you to come in and review your results." I remember saying to her, "Do you have the results in front of you?" And she said, "Yes, I do." And I said, "I would really prefer it if you could just tell me what those results are, instead of me booking time off and being away from my family so that I can come in and find out." She said to me, "Do you have anybody with you?" And I knew in that moment I had tested positive. What I didn't realize is that I had tested positive to BRCA1, the worst possible outcome. I would go to BC Cancer and review what this meant. I was told that I had 88% chance of developing breast cancer. And after the breast exam was done, the surgeon said, "You have 2 ticking time bombs on your chest. And it is not if, but when. We are just waiting for cancer to show up." I was also told that I had 1 in 20 chance that I already had ovarian cancer, and they wouldn't know until they opened me up. This is why they call ovarian cancer the silent killer. So when this happens, you're given 2 options. You can either screen every 6 months to try and detect breast cancer at an early stage, and currently there is no effective method to screen for ovarian cancer, and it is one of the deadliest cancers for women. So I had a really difficult decision to make. I either had to move forward with the screening measures, which weren't all that great, or I had to do preventative surgeries to remove my ovaries, my fallopian tubes, and both of my breasts. As I sat with this decision for some time, I started sharing it with close family members and friends. And I remember the day that I felt like I had the courage to share it with the group of moms that I walked with. We headed out on our walk, and I started to give them a little bit of background on where I'd been. I hadn't been around for the walks, and they were kind of curious, "What's going on with you?" I shared with them that I had been tested, and I had tested positive to a gene mutation. And it was putting me at a very high risk of breast cancer. In that moment, my friend Marianne stopped me and said, "Before you speak one more word, you need to know that I just found out that I have stage 3 breast cancer." In that moment,
here I was trying to make a decision on whether or not I would go forward with preventative surgeries. And here, on the other hand, she was just told that her prognosis, she was stage 3, and her prognosis was really dim. It was like time stood still, and it solidified. There was no decision. I had to do this. I had children, and there was no way that I couldn't proceed with having these surgeries. So that's what I did. I made the decision that day that I wasn't going to doubt this anymore. This was it. I had to choose to live. So I would proceed with surgeries. That meant that I would have 3 surgeries in less than a year. It started with the removal of my ovaries and my fallopian tubes, which I thought would be the easier surgery. 6 months later, I would remove both breasts, and roughly 6 months after that, I would have reconstruction of my breasts. It was a harder journey than what I had anticipated. The removal of my ovaries and fallopian tubes put me into an absolute turmoil. The body part that created hormones, and I was too young at the time to not have them. They tried to provide replacement, but it would take us 2 years before we could actually find a normal balance. Just to give you some perspective, on one of my more trying days, my dear husband would come home from work to me storming down the driveway on my way over to the neighbor's yard with every intention of killing their dog. And I love dogs. That dog's incessant barking had gotten on my every last nerve, and it was like I had sound sensors on the outside of my body, and that dog was barking into every single one of them. It's hard to describe the rage that I would feel. I was completely unbalanced, and I was raising kids. I remember I used to lock myself in the bathroom and count to 10 sometimes because they didn't deserve what I was dishing. It was something that I had to get under control. What I also found out is that I wasn't coping as well as I thought I was. And it would take one of my doctors saying to me that you either fall apart in a trauma or you get through it and then cracks form. And it was clear that the cracks had formed, and it was time for me to take care of them. So my doctor prescribed antidepressants, and we all know the stigma that comes with that. I then began working with a counselor. Going to see my counselor, Joanna, gave me hope. It was a safe place where I could go and come undone, and I didn't have to be brave there. I also had made the decision at this point that I needed to get strong. I needed to help my friend Marianne in her battle. So that's what I did. She was doing incredibly well. They had given her a very dim prognosis, but she had decided that she was not ready. And she changed her diet, and she did everything that she possibly could to make sure that she got one more day. She ended up doing a lot of oral chemotherapy instead of going into BC cancer for a treatment, which was great because she was raising a family as well. But when cancer would come back and rear its ugly head, I was ready, and I was grateful that she let me along for the ride. It meant that every second week we would head to BC Cancer for treatment. I had spent some time in BC Cancer myself, and I didn't feel the doom and gloom that a lot of people do. In fact, I felt that it was a place of a lot of hope. And I think that Marianne could sense that with me, and that that's what she needed. She needed somebody that wasn't going to treat her like she was sick, that was going to be able to go to those appointments and not talk about cancer and not talk about dying. We would head in and we would do blood work first. They were usually long days. We would get to spend the afternoon together in different cafes in the city, in the lounges of BC Cancer, and we talked about everything. We talked about life. We talked about being mothers and wives and dreaming. She taught me so much. But the greatest gift she gave me was that our life is a gift, and it should not be wasted. I remember the week that Marianne phoned me to say that she wouldn't need me to take her to chemo. that her husband was going to take her that week because they were going to also be meeting with the oncologist on the same day that she was getting treatment. I would end up getting a call from her husband the following day, and he told me that things were not good. He said that they had exhausted all efforts and that they had told her that the chemo was going to be stopping, and there was no experimental treatments, there was nothing else that they could do. In that instance, I knew what they had done is they had taken away her hope. And that was exactly what was keeping her in the fight. That was a Thursday, and by Sunday, Marianne lost her battle. It would take me until the following April to really feel the magnitude of the loss. And I think that the realization that I hadn't even really grieved the loss of my own body parts, and then to lose my dear friend. So I had busied myself for a lot of it with people pleasing and worrying about what I thought everybody thought of me and never thinking that I was enough. And then grief came, and it hit me like a freight train. It wasn't waiting for me to get through the never-ending to-do list. It showed up, and it wasn't waiting. I remember I actually had to leave my family. The magnitude of what I was experiencing was too great, and I didn't want my kids to witness it or my husband. I was lucky enough that my parents have summer property in Birch Bay, and I packed my bags, and as soon as my husband got home from work, I left. I remember crying so hard that I thought if I don't pull it together, they're not going to let me through the border. So I did pull it together, and I got to the ocean, and it was almost like I needed that to get through the grief. I needed to lean in. Marianne taught me so much. She really taught me about the beauty of living. And it was time for me to pull it together and really step into my life. And that's what I did. I returned home, and I really started to look at my life differently. It wasn't about the achievements, and it wasn't about the things. That wasn't where the success was. The success was, for me, it was really facing the pain and not running from it. It was in acknowledging that I was not going to be able to just handle this alone. It was really that there's beauty in vulnerability, and there is power in speaking your truth, and there is bravery in asking for help. This has helped me to know my mind, to trust my heart, and to find my courage. Thank you.